Hello, my divine being, and welcome to this week's episode of Confessions of a New Age Goddess. As always, I'm the New Age Goddess herself, Melissa. Joining me today is Myree Morsi. Myree is a soul guide and transformational therapist who, since 1999, has supported people who are navigating their awakening, healing, and soul alignment and spiritual journeys. She carries seasoned expertise as a licensed therapist, conflict resolution and trauma specialist, innately guided spiritual seer and healer, and leadership and self-development coach. So Myree, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa, and welcome, and so beautiful to connect with you, New Age Goddess.
Yes, likewise. I love connecting with like-minded people, as you know. So can you tell us where in the world you're joining us from?
Yes, I am currently in a very beautiful part of the world called the Barossa Valley, which is a vigneron area, wine region in central southern Australia. And it's midsummer, so it's blue skies kind of beaming down on us down under here.
Yeah, so the opposite of where I'm currently at in Chicago. Yes.
Yes, you look like very warmly snug there.
Yes, in my cozy sweater. Yeah, because what I always thought was so fascinating about Australia, I've had a few guests from there. I know the seasons are opposite, but what also I know the toilet flushes the opposite way too. It's like everything's opposite, even like the most minute details. It's also, so I always thought that was fascinating. And actually, my roommates, I have two roommates who are Aussies, because they're parakeets or budgies. I know you guys call them budgies over there.
Budgie, yeah, budgerigas.
Yes, I can never pronounce that correctly because we call them parakeets here. And I even gave them what I felt to be Aboriginal Australian names because I mean, obviously, you know, that's where they're from, whether they know it or not. So yeah, I feel like I have somewhat of an Australian connection in that sense. So yeah, great stuff. So yeah, I know I gave our listeners a little bit of an intro on you, but you know, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, just really how you even got started in the spiritual community?
Sure thing. I would say that my story really is something that's come out of my lived experience. And while I've done a lot of training, a lot of my sort of sense of direction and knowing and what's right for me has really come from like my interaction with life, and also, like many people, from being really lost and confused, particularly when I was in my 20s. In my 20s, I felt this really strong calling to be a healer, and I had come from a childhood where I had a lot of freedom to be very kind of wild and out in nature. And they gave me this freedom to really connect with life and plants and trees and animals in a very sort of shamanic, natural way that I never really questioned. So as a child, I had a lot of psychic gifts, but I never really thought anything of them. In fact, I didn't think that they were special, but I also never talked about them. So no one really criticized it. So I was lucky in that way. And then it all went underground. And when I left high school and went traveling overseas, and then I was in university, this kind of deep knowing that I was here to be a healer woke up. But this was in the early 90s. And I didn't know anyone who was a healer, and I didn't know how to be it. And I had like 2 books I could find, and there was no internet. And so I felt really perplexed about this calling and how it was going to manifest. And I met a couple of wise people along the way. And then I started to have this real quickening of my spiritual nature, and I felt very drawn. Even more so, I'd been meditating for a long time to like yoga and yogic ceremonies and pujas, and then I met a spiritual teacher that really spoke to me, and I ended up living in her spiritual center for a year. And I really cooked my awakening, and I mean that in a good way. I mean I was like getting up at 5 and practicing and doing a lot of like what's called selfless service, so a lot of devotional action. And I didn't realize that what that actually did was it purified you, because I was naive. I was 25. I didn't know anything, right? I thought, oh, this feels good. I'm going to keep doing it because it feels really good. And what I did was I actually really deeply activated my psychic gifts and my spiritual awakening. And about halfway through that time, all of these abilities to be like a seer, which means to see in subtle ways, to see energy, to see other realms, to see beings, to see ghosts, which I wasn't very excited about at the time. I can tell you, I was rather terrified. All of these things woke up. And again, I didn't really have anyone to give me any guidance. And suddenly I'm becoming this being that really should have had a mentor and a teacher. And that continued to unfold over time. And till I started, maybe another year later, I started to gradually meet mentors who could give me pieces of advice or little bits of training. And the most important training I had after I left that spiritual center was that I met this woman. I was working as a journalist, a sports journo. It seems ironic, but it was actually a really great job, because you just hang out with people and get to listen and tune into what is really true. And it's a really great training to be a healer. And I met this woman by chance and interviewed her, and she traveled around the entire world, and her sort of soul calling was to completely trust her angels and spirit guides. That was how she lived. And she would do something like, she got this guidance to travel from, she was a New Zealander, to travel from Australia to London, to not book anything. And when she got there, she would know what to do and where to go. And she would just do it on trust. So she had this amazing joyfulness, and she really taught me how to connect to and listen to and receive guidance from my spirit guides and angels. And that's what really changed my life, and things started to very much quicken. And I started to have a lot of very beautiful angels come forward, primarily for that period of my life, and particularly one in particular who really became a little bit of what you would call a martial arts dojo master. And he pretty much said to me, Myree, you have some very big work to do on the planet, meaning you're going to contribute, but you seriously have to do some big work on yourself first. It was right. It was like a good ass kick. And I took that very seriously, and I did some deep sort of training and learning how to heal myself, really, is what I did for a number of years. And then unexpectedly, my partner a couple of years later nominated me to be offer my first ever healing without even checking with me. I just came home and he said, oh, such and such is coming for a healing. And I was like, what? I'm doing this for another person. So, and then it just kind of took off from there. So I first started offering spiritual and energetic healing with an underpinning of very sort of deep spiritual practice. And then I went on to study trauma therapy and counseling and conflict resolution. And so I've got a lot of very rigorous kind of mainstream training, and this very sort of life lived, practiced on healing myself kind of way of being. And so what I do today is a blend of trauma therapy and process oriented psychology, and a kind of a shamanic way of being with people, and being able to kind of, when I'm with someone, what tends to happen is a lot of my gifts switch on in ways that they're on different when I'm alone. And in that space, I can see, feel, and sense someone's aura, their energy field, their emotional body. And I'm sure all the listeners would not have that experience of, when we have an emotion, it can tend to somatize or get stuck or vibrate or not move very well in a certain part of our body. And then that tends to consolidate problems and issues. So when I'm working with someone, I can see both where things are lodged and functioning or not functioning very well in the aura, but also in the physical body. Mm-hmm. And so for example, as a trauma therapist, I can see, for example, where someone's grief is lodged if they're grieving, right? And then we can move the energy and relate to the physical energetic process, which then moves the psychological process much faster. And then the other thing I tend to do, so I also am a spiritual healer, so I have this really big team of healing beings. And so we can do trauma therapy, bring your awareness into your body and help you to shift and come into your own perception and wisdom of what's happening. But also my spirit team are really amazing healers. So it tends to be this combo of all three. And then at the moment, I'm teaching other people how to do that.
So, yeah, very interesting. How it all came together, because I've always been an advocate myself for, you need mentors. You need that guidance, especially in the beginning. And I always said I would be nothing without my mentors, because when you're starting to feel maybe a little bit crazy, or you're not really understanding how your gifts are coming through. It's like, how do I even work with it? How do I even use what I have if I don't even have a word for it? I don't even know what this is. So yeah, very much with you that the mentorship is huge, the community, and then also trusting yourself. Because you even said, I was working on myself, that I had that down pat, but then, oh, now I need to work on somebody else. It's like a whole other can of worms that you have to open up. And you really have to trust your gifts, your abilities, to work on that other person, because it's very vulnerable. It's very vulnerable. It's very, if I mess up something on myself, it's only me, but another pair of eyes that can be really intimidating. So trust is huge as well. And what I was really curious about is, I know you do work with angels and guides and messages come through, but how do you really know um, how to really communicate with them on a deeper level? Like, how do you know this is Myree, this is my
Mm.
consciousness, or this is an angel, this is a guide's consciousness?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So the most important thing is getting to know your own energy first, and your own sort of resonance and feeling, because that gives you a baseline. And then it's really practice. And some of us, I think that's really important to say, not all of us, like, we really commonly think of getting messages as audio, so hearing and seeing. But I actually think that they're less common. I think that the most common way we get messages is feeling and knowing. So really much more like, we get messages through our body, through our gut instinct, through feeling and through knowing, and that spirit and the universe is communicating through those channels, because spirit will communicate in the most available channels. Right. And then over time, as your other channels open up, then they'll start to kind of jive in those ones as well. So if you're a feeler, they're going to really help you to have very strong feeling sense of things, or a gut instinct, or a knowing. So I really want to open it up, that you don't have to be like, have the Hollywood ones, right? The ones that are very sort of fancy on TV. And each angel or each sort of spirit team has a resonance. It has a frequency that over time you can get to know. And a spirit team's frequency will only feel positive, loving, and elevating, even if the message is quite strong, or like a very big no, or a very protective. Actually, don't get with that person, right? Like, it's still got an uplifting energy to it. Whereas an energy that's not aligned, or is not coming from that kind of unconditional love source of a being like that, is, you can feel that it's off. Right? It has like a vibration. It makes you anxious. It makes you needy. It feels like it wants, or it's demanding of something, or it's maybe critical. And even if, and that can be like in feeling and knowing channels as well. So it just takes time and practice in being willing to trust yourself. And I believe that every single one of us has inside us a radar. Right. And it's up to us also to run that guidance through our radar for clarity. And for me, because I'm very clairaudient, meaning I hear a lot, I actually have a rule that any of my team, and even if they've spoken to me for 20 years, they must announce who they are before they speak. Right. So Archangel Gabriel, say Archangel Gabriel, and then he'll give me his message. I actually know in which part of my aura they speak from. They each kind of like populate around you in different ways, and they each have a different tone. But I absolutely demand, because there is a spiritual law that if you can say something like, in the name of Lord Jesus, who are you? And at that spiritual level, they have to actually tell you who they are. And so, and if they're silent or they won't answer that question, I would not listen to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like changing the channel.
For sure. Yeah. And that's good that you have that discernment. Because there's other intuitives I've spoken to too, that they're like, well, if it's coming from the left, I know it's this person, or if it's coming from the right, it's this person, or guide, what have you. And it's kind of like they've had this understanding with the guides, so they know exactly who they're talking to on their level. And what it feels like, because my energy feels different. This guide feels different from that guide, and so forth. And it does take practice. It does take practice, because you really do need to get into that feeling place and what do all these different levels feel like? And if you are someone who is already such maybe highly sensitive person, or someone who maybe is more emotional, that's only going to get heightened. So it really is a really good trait to have. So I think, kind of branching off of that, what are some other, just, I don't know if they're even just life experiences or just things that happen in your life that really tended to shape those gifts to an even deeper level?
Wow, that's such a big question. I would say one of the biggest influences was having a really painful childhood and having a lot of challenges, significant early childhood trauma, and then finding ways as a child to kind of manage that. And of course, you put a lot in your body and wait until that Pandora's box opens when you're an adult, which it did in my 30s. So I would say that things that really shaped me was in my early 30s, when I was about 32, 33, I had a really significant trauma shock. And what they did was it opened my Pandora's box. And out of that box came a lot of memories of sexual trauma and other traumas that I mean, I kind of knew they were there, but I couldn't track them down. And I'm sure listeners have had that experience. Oh my God, I'm sure something went on or something happened. But then suddenly I had like images and memories, and I had to piece them together. And one of the things that came out of that Pandora's box was really acute PTSD. And it was really very of the hellish kind of variety of acuteness. And well, I wouldn't want to live. I don't know how I survived those few years when I had that, when I was working through that, but it really broke open my heart, and it taught me so much about being human and vulnerability and humility, and what it's like to go really, really low, and what it takes to wrestle with enormous psycho-spiritual emotional challenges. And I think it really built my inner strength and my muscle. And I learned that in that kind of spiritual warrior's path, that everything you face becomes the gift that you give to others and becomes the wisdom that you can share. And then the other really significant event would have been my brother's death in 2013, and he died in a really horrific, tragic way, which completely shattered my heart. And I had to find my way through a very complex kind of grief that really took me, I would say, to this bottom of the well, where I met this place where endless pain meets endless compassion, and where at that point where they met, I found freedom. And to my own surprise, I found when I could sit with both those energies, I also found immense joy, and that joy hasn't left me. And so those I would say that I am really someone who's been formed in the fire of life, right? And having to like sit in that fire and find my way through it. And I'm grateful for it. I wouldn't, if you say, do you want to do those things again? I would say no, but I'm grateful for how they that cauldron. And the other significant event I would say was that I went through a very long Kundalini awakening, which I'm happy to talk about. And that Kundalini awakening, in some ways, I came into this life with Kundalini active, with all those psychic gifts, but very sort of bespoke and in the background. And when I lived in that spiritual center, it really woke up, but was still kind of manageable. And then around the time I had my Pandora's box open, the Kundalini really got pretty hot as well. And then I went on a very intense, wild journey with that awakening process that finished in 2009. In that I could feel that the energy was so intense that I was either going to pop and wake up, or I was going to die, because I didn't think my body could handle my body was like inside, it was like a jet plane that was just screaming. There was just so much energy running so fast. It was like I was getting ready to take off, and I thought, I'm either going to take off soon or like leave this mortal coil. And I simply woke, one night I could feel this shift, and I suddenly felt exhausted, and I went to bed. And then I woke up the next morning and there was no mind. There was just absolute silence. There was no identity. There was no Myree in that traditional way of having a sense of self. There was just only this kind of vast space of consciousness and love and peacefulness. And and this is very common, when I had that, when I was kind of just lying there, I knew what had happened to me. I knew, wow, this is awakening. My Kundalini has ended. And it was so funny. Like I was kind of like, I couldn't move because my body had gone through such a change. It needed time to kind of even work out how to move from that silence. And so much of my organizing structure had left as well. But it was so funny. I just kind of lay in bed, unable to move, laughing, because I could see that in that moment, all the things that I thought were the biggest problems in the world just didn't even matter. Like, you just, there's such deep clarity about what really matters. And that has become I guess, a profound reference point and anchor point for the rest of my life, because then my life shifted into the integration of that awakening. And so that's 13 years ago. And it continues to be this absolute joy and curiosity to continuously learn more about awakening and how to live from that in an embodied way, and how to share, love and love of self and humanity on this planet that comes through that awakening with other people, which is, and, deal with the challenges of that as well, because, life is not, just because you wake up, it doesn't mean that life is only a bowl of roses.
Yes.
Or a bed of roses, or whatever that saying is.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Bed of roses. I'm not sure.
Yeah, bed of roses. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we get it. No, and thanks for sharing that. But it really is so profound that it's like, you had this trauma, then it got expressed as an adult, because then you have, that adult understanding, and to manage it, work through it, all of that you didn't have as a child, of course. And then it was like you were reborn. I mean, like when you said I was laying in bed and I couldn't move, I'm just thinking of a baby. I'm thinking of a baby laying in bed, they can't like walk out of bed if they want. But you have that still awareness of an adult of, oh, this is kind of funny because now I'm seeing things through this new lens that I didn't have before. And wow, that's really refreshing, actually, in a way.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love the way you framed it. And it's true. It is like being a baby and being reborn. And you literally do have to learn how to do things again from this whole new perspective. And I had no idea how I was going to relate from that space and have friends from that space. It took me ages to kind of, I was saying ages, but like 3 or 4 weeks before I could like walk properly. Like I could walk that day, but I wasn't very steady on my feet for a while, because my body, our body is organized around our identity. And when you have a sudden identity shift for some people, then the body has to kind of rework out what that means.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Because, to your point, you kind of build your life around this identity, around this specific person who looks and acts a certain way. And then when that kind of falls apart, we do have to restart. We do have to rebuild. And what does that even look like? This is something so new. It's like this changes everything, and everything's going to look different. So I could see that being overwhelming, but at the same time, kind of exciting.
Yeah, totally. I would completely agree. You have such an amazing ability to kind of like just pick things up and frame it. I'm just admiring that about you. But absolutely true. And I found myself for a long time having way more questions than I had answers for, and that I just had to be very patient and allow those answers to show up for me.
Yes, and I love that you were willing to be patient too, because I feel like there's so many people, myself included, for a long time, where it's almost like, but I'm asking the question now, and I'm trying to find the solution now. So why isn't it presenting itself? And even outside of patience, there's also process. That was a big aha moment for me, even because I said, well, I can be patient, I'm not a child, I can wait my turn and all of that, but I'm not even paying attention to the process because I'm rushing because I want to get to the answer. And then I could have learned so much from the process and I didn't learn it. And then maybe my answer was in the process. So it's like really patience, I really feel like is twofold because it's half patience and it's half process.
Yeah, it's how you, it's what you do, because you can be patient, but inside the patience, there's actually a very big story going on, moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. And as you say, very big processes going on and things being revealed that are cooking the outcome or cooking the insights, or helping you to become the person you need to be so that you can receive that answer or that insight. And I found like in that sort of integration phase of awakening, the thing you're closest to is silence and quiet and peace, and that has that it sort of emanates a love. And what's both beautiful and painful about it is you don't want to move from that, because to move from it is to move away from truth. And so even if there's like, you know, something that's saying, oh my God, you have to work out how to relate to people from here, there's, if you go towards that direction of that kind of need and push, it just feels like you're falling off the very fine line that you're being asked to walk.
Yeah, and that's so crucial because even there's been times where I'm like, oh man, I had a bump in the road, or that shouldn't be it. But it's like sometimes that was the message. Sometimes the experience was right in the middle. So I really feel like when you look at it through that lens, it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Or, you know, this extra hiccup was worth it. So I just love all of that. And then kind of jumping off of that point, I know you said you would dive a little bit deeper into this. Could you kind of explain to us a little bit about your Kundalini awakening, what it is, what are symptoms? Maybe some people have, you know, gone through it, but they didn't even know what it was, and etc.
Yeah, sure thing. So Kundalini is a natural organic energy. You can think of it as it's consciousness, energy, and love, and it's often called Shakti. And if you think of the fact that if we're soul or spirit, and in effect we're like a fractal, we're like this fractal, this like tiny piece of the infinite consciousness or love or divine, whatever you want to call that, or quantum field. And then Kundalini is like this fractal again of the divine and you. It's like this consciousness, energy, love that is totally aligned and with in the infinite, but it's also very aligned and devoted to who you are and why you're here and what it is that you came here to express, but most devoted to your awakening and what's considered union, where you come back into unity consciousness or oneness with the infinite that you come from. So it's this consciousness that you inherit, everyone inherits when they're born, and it lives in, traditionally it lives in your pelvis, and for the men it's in the perineum, and for women and it's just connected to the cervix. So it's in that kind of lower body centers. And for many people, we come in and that energy is considered dormant or asleep. And when the Kundalini is more asleep, we more see ourselves as material beings, and we're more interested in material outcomes in our life, because the Kundalini is like the spiritual activation energy. It's the thing that lights us up and starts to make us interested. If you're listening to this podcast, even if your Kundalini isn't fully active, there's some frequency, right, that it's emitting in you, because you're here listening to this kind of podcast, which is all about expanding your consciousness and your reality, and helping you to learn more so that you can find the, you know, the threads and the nuggets in your life. And so we all know people that are primarily perceive themselves that way. I bet everyone listening to this podcast goes, oh my God, Uncle Brian or my cousin James, so material. Right? And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with having a material life. And that is, you know, that's where their awakening is. It's still in that kind of domain. And then once that sort of fractal of consciousness starts to wake up, and that has three directions. And the primary one, especially to begin, is what's called an ascending flow, meaning it will flow up the body from the lower centers. And Sometimes when it activates, some people know it activates because it just feels like a rush of energy or electricity or light or frequency, and sometimes sound through from the base of the body up through. And for some people it might stop at the heart or the throat or the third eye, and for some people the crown opens and almost like it pours out like a little kind of fountain at the top of the head. And in that initial phase, there can be a lot of experiences of expansive peace and bliss, of insights, of a sense of oneness. You can get a lot of awareness of the nature of reality because suddenly your consciousness expands. And then what it does normally then is it starts to drop back down to the lower center. So it's kind of had this birth, and then it starts to slowly move up through the body in different ways, in different sort of flows. And then what its purpose becomes is it becomes a purification process. So it is devoted in seeking to purify out of you at every level, your physical bodies, your tissues, your organs, your nervous system, your energy body and your aura, your emotions. It's seeking to purify and release from you. So to dissolve, think of a dissolving agent in a way, that it wants to dissolve all of the obstructions. And you would know what they are, dear beautiful listener. Like, they're the things where you feel stuck or bugged or annoyed, or you just can't find a solution to something, or this thing keeps coming back from 25 years ago, or the thing your mother said to you or did, right? These are all these kind of places where we're kind of caught up. And so she seeks to liberate you from all of those attachments and injuries and trauma. And so it's really a very powerful transformation, purification process. And in the process of releasing things, what then happens is, so for example, your heart starts to clear the way it's armored and defended and protected and closed, or the way you carry around the pain of being abandoned or had your heart broken, right? So she'll work through that, and that's not necessarily pleasant, right? Right? Like you can feel like sometimes you can feel that block being worked on, or it can feel like burning, or can feel like an ache, or like sometimes you get physical symptoms as well. But then as that shifts, what tends to happen is you can see in people this extraordinarily beautiful heart opening, and it literally can look psychically like the door, like imagine two big beautiful doors in front of the heart, and they just open sideways and out, and the kind of the light and the beauty and the resonance of the heart opens. And then what comes with that is sort of unconditional love, equanimity, compassion, and it's just much easier to kind of stay in that kind of seat of the heart. And so that will happen in all of our major energy centers. And ideally you want this process, this is my philosophy anyway, I really believe that when you go through awakening, you still need to be able to manage your life, right? You still need to go to your job. If you have kids, you still need to feed them and wash them and take them to school and deal with them when they're arguing with one another. All of the things of being a parent or holding down a job, whatever it is that you do. And so you really want your Kundalini as much as possible to be as calm and as regulated, because it can, if you have a lot of trauma in your body, or your Kundalini opens in a very volatile way, or you have significant obstructions, and that can be if you've had surgeries and all those kind of things, because it can obstruct the flow, then you can have there are a whole lot of difficulties and difficult symptoms you can have with Kundalini as well. So it's something that I always advise immense care. I never advise someone to just go out and find someone to switch it on for you, because that can often be regrettable. And my sense in the old sort of more traditional teachings on Kundalini, and I tend to align with them, is that Kundalini is like a fruit on a tree. And over time, that fruit ripens. It ripens with the water, the way you nourish the tree of your life, whether you feed it with yoga and meditation or music or books, or it's like we can't make the Kundalini necessarily activate, but we can nourish the tree of our life so that the fruit of Kundalini ripens. And I really trust that she will open in the right time and at the right place. And that to me is much better, because you're more likely for it to open when you're more prepared and ready and have the psychological resources to deal with it, because it will ask you to grow very deeply psychologically. And so what I'm seeing on the planet at the moment right now is an absolute wildfire of awakening, right? Because the consciousness, if you know much about astrology and Mayan astrology, all astrological traditions speak about how the frequency on this planet is rising and elevating us all. And even though at the moment that looks like a whole lot of chaos and pandemic and division and polarity, despite all of that, and you're one of these people because you're listening, where there are so many people that are waking up, and the more that sort of frequency and atmosphere on this planet and the vibration of the planet itself raises, the easier it is for us to catch awakening, meaning that awakening is infectious and that we transmit it to each other through contact with one another, through YouTube videos, through books, through music, through art. And so we are literally in so many more, having so much more exposure to literally bandwidth and wavelengths of awakening than has ever happened on this planet. And so people are just waking up spontaneously and all over the place. And I know this because it shows up in my inbox, and people come to some of my courses and programs, and I hear the most amazing stories. And in these, 100 or 200 years ago, it was very hard to get awakening, to get your Kundalini awakening opened, because the consciousness on the planet was way lower in the Piscean age. You had to find a teacher that was awakened. You maybe had to serve them for 7 years, and they gave you a mantra, and then you practice that for another 10 years, and then Kundalini awakened. We don't have to do that anymore. You just pick up your phone, you go to YouTube, right? And you listen to someone talk, and you get this transmission, and it's very impersonal, but enough to wake you up. And so people are waking up from reading books and YouTube and doing yoga and meditation, or being in nature. I painted a picture. I know one dear soul, I really felt for him. He wasn't a spiritual person at all, not a spiritual bone in his body. And all he did was read one Gabby Bernstein book. And he said to me, I just wanted to feel better. So I did this meditation out of the Gabby Bernstein book, and now I have roaring Kundalini. And I was like, ooh. And he was like, can I just go back to how I was? I was like, no.
No, you can't go back. You can't.
No, it's a one-way ticket. You really just have to come into relationship with an acceptance and befriend the process. So, and you asked me about symptoms, so I say that. So Kundalini, it's interesting because most people these days diagnose with Dr. Google, right? You might have like a little set of symptoms you'll put in heat. You might put in anxiety, insomnia. What else might you put in? You might put in electricity in my body, and all I want to do is be a hermit. And you put that in. You put that in a search engine, and it's most likely one of the things you'll find on one of the pages is it will say, do you have a Kundalini awakening? And then you'll start reading about that, and you'll start to recognize, wow, I have all these symptoms of Kundalini awakening, because Kundalini can sit inside and look like other things.
Right.
Right. And unless you recognize it's Kundalini, you might think that you have OCD, or you might think that you have an anxiety disorder, or you might think that you have a heart condition, because Kundalini, as it's purifying and activating, and if it's running too fast, because if you think of it as your body, your nervous system is it's like an electrical system. Yeah. And if you have too much electricity running through that system at once, you're going to have electrical problems, right? You're going to have energetic problems, which turn out to be physical problems in your body. Or if your Kundalini is going too fast and it's in your head, so you've got this high, potent, pure energy vibrating extremely fast and intense and stuck in your head, meaning it can't get out the top of your crown, then you're going to be anxious and you're not going to be able to sleep. And that's just pure reality of physics. Like it's like drinking 15 cups of coffee and then going to bed and thinking you're going to be able to sleep. Like, you're not going to be able to. So what I find a lot of the time is that often before people realize they've had a Kundalini awakening, they've gone to the doctor, they've had a whole lot of tests because they have symptoms like in their body or in their psyche, and everything comes back normal. And they go, well, medically I'm normal, but I'm not normal. I'm not my old normal. I'm some new state of being and I don't like it. And it's usually quite, some people go have a really beautiful experience for the first year or two, and so it's very easeful. But for some people, um, it can be really terrifying, and because suddenly you start to change, and it may be starting to change things you don't want to change, right? You don't want to give that thing up. You're really attached to a relationship, and even though the relationship isn't working, and your awakening is it's kind of making it more and more difficult to stay in that relationship, or you become really sensitive and you can't go to shopping centers. One of the things that I noticed with Kundalini is it makes us very sensitive. So if you're going through a period of your life where you suddenly feel, oh my God, I'm just so sensitive to everything. I can't go to the shopping center. My family's energy is too much for me. Oh my God, my workplace. If that's happening to you, it's really maybe good to kind of contemplate, am I in the early stages? Am I kicking over into a Kundalini awakening? Because that kind of onset of hypersensitization is also a really big signal and symptom that it's happening. And so I've talked a lot about the challenges and symptoms, but there's immense beauty as well. And the beauty is connecting to who you really are, like your deep, integrous, authentic, vast nature. So you're connecting to your beauty and the love that you really are, and it's really grounding you in that love consciousness, really. And it's not just, some people go, oh, that 70s idea of love, like that hippie love. It's more sort of gutsy than that. It's like really practical love of yourself, of others, of infinite, of humanity, and I think of this planet and of life itself. And it can activate a lot of your spiritual and psychic gifts, and those gifts are usually aligned with your purpose and why you're here. So I'm sure that Kundalini in some way is dancing inside of Melissa, like, because she does Akashic records and Reiki. So it's definitely alive in those passions that she has and the psychic gifts. Even if it's like not like a full on process, it's still cooking, right? And so even the way I talked about Melissa, then it's like inside her Akashic records reading, it's inside her Reiki offering. That is Kundalini kind of opening those doorways of purpose and of gifts and bringing them into alignment with who you are. And the more you awaken, the harder it is to not be in alignment with who you are, or to do anything that isn't in alignment with that sort of sense of self. So I have a lot of people that at the start, they don't like the Kundalini awakening because of all the change and growth. And it's like, sometimes it feels like you've got two jobs. You've got your job, and then you've got your Kundalini job. But after a while, they just love it because it takes them towards why they came here, and it gives them the courage to make the changes they need in their lives in order to step into those roles. I see people change careers, move countries, fall in love with themselves. I had one person recently who, when I first met her, it was only 4 months ago, she had extreme chronic fatigue. She'd had it for many, many years. And through working with her Kundalini and coming to some understanding about what the Kundalini was trying to heal some trauma in her body. And so by helping release that trauma and coming into a relationship, the Kundalini was also very intense for her. And I saw her recently and she said to me, my goodness, the Kundalini is now calm and soothed and in the background. All that trauma has gone and I don't have fatigue anymore. She said, I'm doing things I love and I'm having fun. So it's just an example of how it can be a healing agent. And for her, she was just right to make that shift. And for some of us, the healing journey is long and slow, and actually often like long and slow because it is more manageable and sustainable. So I think that's a good overview.
Yes, yes. I want to thank you for that so much, because you kind of told us, the not so fun parts, the great parts about it, and the purpose. the purpose of it too, which is really important, especially in the beginning, to see that long-term purpose and kind of what signs to look out for. Like, why can't I sleep? Or why am I anxious? There's always another emotional reason behind it, right? All of these physical ailments. And yeah, I like how you said, but you have to kind of stay grounded too, right? You still have a job and, adult responsibilities, because there are people that I know who have gone through a Kundalini awakening, and it's kind of like they're always so open and they don't really ground, and they choose that for themselves, and that's perfectly fine. And they've kind of built a life around that, where I am always going to be open and I can't work a traditional job, and that's how I am, and I'm choosing that. So yeah, you kind of have to see, how does this also fit into my life, or what do I have to change about my life? Like you said, changing a relationship, leaving certain things because now we've grown, so I can't wear a child size small shirt anymore because I've grown out of it, and that's okay. And it's those growing pains. Yeah, it does feel uncomfortable, but it was also very necessary. But yeah, it's just so interesting that there is a physical element to it. There's that emotional element to it. And then there's also like kind of a third thing of things that I've never encountered before, and how these encounters have changed me, and then is going to change the world around me too. So I just feel like everything kind of like bounces off of each other when you arrive to that awakening stage.
Absolutely, because it's constantly evolving and shifting your perspective and your perception at the same time. And you can honestly look back in a year or two and feel like you're not the same person at all. You don't think the same, you don't feel the same, you have changed your values, or your values have deepened. And the other thing that I love to see about Kundalini is it brings in a lot of personal power, whether that power is spiritual, energetic, physical, and psychological. It's like you are asked to receive the power of who you are and what you came here to be. And I don't think we necessarily live in a culture that teaches us how to accept our power. I think that is an enormous sort of gap in our world. And so then suddenly we often don't have a lot of even encouragement. Like, who says, hey, Melissa, let's just sit and support you to like connect with and receive your power. But Kundalini does. She's like,
Yeah, Kundalini understands. Yeah, because
yeah.
that's what I always, kind of one of my missions of even just what I do is empowerment. If I could even put it into one word, because I want other people to see how powerful they are. Because just the way I hear certain people talk to themselves, or things that they didn't even think were possible, but I can see how possible it is. And it's just like, oh my God, you don't even know how wildly powerful you are. And if you knew, everything would be different, not just the way that you interact with others, but how other people would interact with you. And then it's this continuous thing. So yeah, that's why I really did want to talk about this topic, because like I said, some people might have gone through it or are starting to get through it and don't even have the verbiage or understanding of what that even is. Okay, great. And then Myree, if someone did want to work with you, of course, what would that look like?
So I work in a number of different ways. I have a practice where I see people one-on-one for all sorts of all sorts of reasons. Some people come for trauma, but the majority of the people I work with are heart-centered, very highly sensitive, people going through some kind of awakening. It doesn't have to be a Kundalini awakening. And then we just work on whatever area of their life that seems to be. I have this real feeling that a lot of the work that I'll do in the next period of time is probably going to be with your generation. I think that your generation are the ones that are here to really light up this planet and to kind of set it on fire with consciousness. And thank God you're here, right? Because we so deeply need it. And then I also teach as well. So there is a program that you can join on Kundalini that helps really. It is a very generous program. Like, I just love to give, and there is so much in there for you, and it teaches you the phases of awakening and how to befriend Kundalini and what to expect and how to navigate it. And most of all, my whole approach is how to have it to be sustainable so you can still have a life, right? That story I was telling about that woman, she got a life back, and that is the best thing ever, to go through awakening but still have your life. And then I also teach people how a program which I call Spirit Magic, which is teaching you to build your own spirit team, and then how to collaborate and heal yourself, and then how to collaborate with spirit and heal other people. So, and you can use it on your family, your kids, yourself. You can use it, you know, in a practice. And then I also teach people how to navigate life as a highly sensitive person, and also how to be a really conscious leader. So they're like my passions. I'm very multi-passionate, so I need to do all of these different things, but I guess it's all about love. Everything is just deep soaked there.
Yeah, that's definitely the underlying message. And you can just hear that just from the way that you describe certain things and how passionate you are about it, that's really the main focus. And also, yeah, to be multifaceted, I think that's really important because we're not all one size fits all. And there's so many people that they know something might be a little bit off, or they just kind of want to improve something, dive into something, whatever it is, and they just don't even know what it is. You know, I mean, I remember when I was a kid in grammar school, you know, the teachers, when it was like parent teacher night, they'd always be like, oh, Melissa, she's well behaved, but did you know she's really sensitive? Like she cries a lot, and she's just, anytime someone looks at her the wrong way, she's all emotional about it. And my mom would be like, yeah, I live with her. Like, it's just how she is. Like, what do you want me to do about it? But it was always, I mean, every year it was just, hey, did you know she's sensitive? So it's kind of like, I always knew that about myself, but then to be this highly sensitive person, then to realize, oh, I feel more. That's one of my gifts, really. Even a lot of adults don't even understand that. So just to have that understanding, and then someone who can work with them through it, that might just be all the help that they need. It could be something as simple. It sounds simple, and I say as simple as that, but it really is quite layered. But once you know what the issue is or what the problem is, then it's not so scary, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think what you're saying is such a good point. I find with highly sensitive people, especially high frequency ones, that if you can support them to see themselves and to be able to reflect and notice how who they are is actually a gift, it's like changing the game.
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I so didn't like about myself when I was younger. But then I did see it as a gift, and I'm so glad that I do have it. But it's something that if I didn't work through it, I could have always seen it as a negative. So it is quite important to do that deep dive. Okay,
Absolutely.
for sure. And then Myree, you know, how can somebody work with you? You know, how can they find you, and etc.
Yes, you can find me on my website, which is www.myree, which is MYREE with my Aussie accent, .com.au. And you can also just Google me, put my name in a search engine. And so you can read about my individual sessions and my programs on my website. And my website has lots of free things and goodies. And if you're going through Kundalini, there is actually a beautiful ebook, and it is actually a real book. It's not just like some Word document. It's actually a beautifully crafted book that gives you, I think there's like 10 or 15 different ways that you can do beautiful self-care and look after yourself going through the awakening, and gives you lots of tips to help you understand yourself. So if you are going through that, that is a very good resource. And so you can discover, I usually write a blog once a week. You can also find me on Instagram, and that's about it. But my website would be it's a bit of a world that you can go explore.
Ooh, I love that. Love exploring new worlds right from the comfort of my home. Okay, great. So then I'll definitely have everything linked in the bio, in the show notes, so our listeners can easily find you. And then, you know, Myree, I really just wanted to thank you for coming on the pod. I learned a lot myself. I'm always a student. And yeah, I just feel like it's something that I don't hear talked about enough. Or if I do hear it talked about, it always sounds like this scary thing, and you know, there's never really what's the purpose. So I'm so glad we tackled that today. Just what is the purpose of it, how it can benefit you, and what it really is there for.
Absolutely. It's been such a joy to meet you and to really, actually, I really enjoyed your amazing framing ability. So I loved experiencing that too, as I'm sure all your listeners do. And so I want to wish all your listeners, all you New Age goddesses out there, such a beautiful awakening journey and all the blessings for 2022.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And this was really just another great example of how spirituality and the use of different methods and teachings can really make great changes in your daily life. So, as always, if you are looking for a way to relieve stress and anxious thoughts or looking to gain some clarity, you can always book a Reiki energy healing or Akashic Records reading session with me at thenewagegoddess.com. Much love and namaste.